Okay, this is a kind of a new setup today for the Ask Me Anything, We the Govern Ask Me Anything event. And so we have a screen behind us, a little different setup here sitting at the table. And if you look at some of the videos that I'm going to put out this week, we're actually trying a little bit different format here. I'm always interested in your feedback. Let me know if you like it or you don't like it, or if you have any feedback. To some extent, when beggars can't be choosers, and I'm generally able to have people donate and help me to get some of the stuff set up. So I always appreciate everything that I'm able to use here, and it's been great to have a studio that I can come down to and record these videos and then do these live stream events with you. So I always appreciated all the people that are on the live stream right now and wanting to ask me questions. And again, one thing I'm going to mention is that if you can do @WeTheGovern when you ask a question versus just making a comment, it makes it a little bit easier for me to spot your question as they kind of scroll up and go by. So, and I'll try to answer those as you send them across. Now, anybody who has kids at school age, as I do, and I have right now 3 that are in high school, and plus an exchange student this year. Plus, and I just had a son graduate from high school. So it's a busy time of the year because this is the week that your kids are essentially going back to school. And I have them in 2 different schools right now, so they're on a different schedule and time, so not all the kids are on the same schedule. But I know what it's like to be juggling the start of the school year and all the drama and kind of finishing up the projects at home or doing whatever your last maybe camping trip or your last barbecue before you kind of get into the school season. And one of my topics of the videos this week is just kind of I'm talking about the dumbing down of the public education system in Washington State. Although it's not just our state, it's pretty much all the states generally, and just this general trend in dumbing down, I think, the quality of the education in general, and specifically the basic metrics on math and English comprehension, civics, history, geography, things like that. It's funny because I had a daughter that was overseas for a year as an exchange student in Europe, and she was in Germany. And one of the things that the Germans had as a reputation for Americans is that we have no idea about our geography, and we couldn't find our own country on a map, let alone any country in Europe. So, and I think sometimes that's a deserved reputation because Americans oftentimes don't. My daughter was not a good example of that, but there's a lot of Americans who have no idea where any countries are in the world, and to some extent that's what happens when you're a big country, and you can basically live your entire life and never leave the borders and not feel like you've missed anything. But it's just an interesting issue that I do believe in times past that I think Americans cared more about geography and history and math and English and other things like that. And so all of the tests now that any kind of tests that students are taking in general, it clearly shows a substantial degradation in just basic understanding of a lot of basic math and English skills. In fact, there were several studies that came out recently in cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and Baltimore and all these other big cities where the teachers union really controls the program, and they're very politically powerful there, where there's literally not a single kid at a school that can pass even a proficiency level grade in anything in English or in math. I mean, that's just a substantial deficiency in the education program. So it's a disaster in the making because it's not that kids can't turn their lives around later. I know plenty of adults that have done that, where they've gone out and they did poorly in school when they were younger, and then for whatever reason, motivation kicked in later in life, and they decided to make up for lost time, and they became pretty educated, and they became quite capable later on. But it's a shame to waste the time that they're in school right now, that we're paying a massive amount of money in Washington State, over $18,000 a year per student, to have them come out functionally illiterate, mathematically ignorant, and completely lacking any knowledge in history or civics or anything else. And so when you see those types of scores coming out the way they are right now, there's clearly a major problem. And some of it, unfortunately, is willful, a willful decision to dumb down the education curriculum, a willful decision to just graduate anybody. And so you're encouraging students to not strive to get good grades or get any grades, really, because they're just going to always pass you through. And even for the kids that are getting grades and care about it, the teachers that might have had 49 metrics before of verifying different elements of your comprehension in math or different elements of comprehension in English or your skills, that's been winnowed down quite a bit. I've talked to a number of teachers, and they're very frustrated with the fact that the expectations for students have been taken down substantially. And that's actually a pretty big turnaround from the promotion of grit and rigor and other issues that were kind of the highly capable high cap programs are being implemented in the school system in the past, and IEPs, which individual education plans oriented around that the high capacity opportunities in school. And when you just wipe all that out and you claim it's racist or you claim it's elitist or whatever it is, you're just destroying the ability of any kid to excel in school at a younger age, and you're wasting it. So anyway, there's so again, some people are jumping on with with some different comments here. Cristiano, you had a question about, tell me again why gas is so expensive here. Well, Washington State has, it's funny, we actually have a couple things going for us that would make gas less expensive. Number one is proximity to Alaska oil. That, in theory, would make, because it's less transportation to get the oil here, and we have a couple refineries in our state, so we can refine the oil and make it into fuel here in our state. And so arguably that would make oil and fuel in general less expensive. The practical realities are, of course, that government finds a way to jack up the cost of fuel by several different ways. Our state, the most obvious is taxes, which you can look at, and you're paying, almost I don't think we're over 50 cents a gallon now on just straight up taxes. That's obvious, and that's something you can see. You can actually see how much your gas tax is per gallon. However, what's really bumped up the gas recently, probably another 40 cents or so far, it could be higher, is this carbon credit tax scheme. It's really it's just a con artist game. It's an indulgence scheme where businesses get to pay to buy carbon credits, and the state, and then essentially that just gets built into the cost of the fuel that you're buying. Inslee just flat out lied, and so did everybody in his administration and everybody that voted for this, which was all Democrats. They continuously have lied about what this is. It's essentially a tax, and they prevented the gas companies from being able to add an indication as to how much that cost was going to be per gallon. And it's this murky, kind of confusing world of it's a strange world where you're bidding on these carbon credits, your indulgences, to allow you to pollute. And it's just one big scam, of course, designed to do nothing more than increase the cost of fuel for you and to put money in the pockets of insiders to the whole process. And the state gets to, of course, pocket a bunch of that money as well. So that's one of the reasons why you're seeing fuel costs go up so much in Washington State. The cat fight between Sarah Nelson and Tammy Morales. Do you take any side? Oh, gosh, I'm going to have to remember on this one. Somebody was just talking about this over the weekend. I can't remember the details on that one, and I never take side when people like that are fighting each other. I just sit back and let them go for it. Let's see. Bobby, if you really have a video about money that ended up in the superintendent's pockets, that is definitely worth sharing that video. So I'd like to definitely hear more about that. So I definitely would want to. I definitely want to hear more about that. Anybody that's looked at my and I have videos on this. I also have some articles on my website about the Moses Lake superintendent a couple years ago. Surprisingly, we actually caught the guy stealing money from the school district, and I say surprisingly because that's you'll. If you dig into government at all, at any level, you're going to find a lot of problems in government. I mean, it's just the way government operates. It's incompetent at best, sometimes egregiously incompetent, and frequently corrupt. Now, corruption doesn't always mean that they're formally breaking the law. Sometimes it's just immoral, and there's a way to kind of wiggle through the process so that you can't really hold them legally accountable. But corruption pretty much exists in most. I always say wherever two or more bureaucrats are gathered, you will find some level of corruption, and you will always find incompetence. We had the Moses Lake superintendent at the time. We actually caught him stealing money from the school district, and he did it in three ways. He was actually giving himself an unapproved pay raise, like a bonus. The school board didn't approve, didn't sign off on. He would just write himself a check periodically, and it was ridiculous. That was one. That was the most obvious. The second one was his credit card receipts. He had spent like $10,000. I detailed the exact amount, but money for personally. So he'd use the school card to basically pay for personal things. And the other thing he did is the third way he was stealing money was he was taking vacation, and then so he wasn't on the clock, wasn't working, but then he was claiming that he was on the clock and working during that time. And so at the end of the year, he would take his vacation paid. So he'd get the vacation, and then he made the school district pay him. And keep in mind, this guy's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Very high paid position, the highest paid position in every school district. It's going to be the superintendent. But I don't usually catch them just flat out stealing money like this guy. Now, the interesting thing about that particular story at the time was that I remember that there was some rumor he was going to threaten to sue me or something about it. And I was looking at this report, and it was as plain as day that this guy stole the money. And so I thought that was kind of funny, and I was encouraging him to go ahead and sue me if for revealing the truth. And we published it, and then about a month later, the guy declared bankruptcy. The sad part about that story, and I mean it's a human nature story more than anything else, was when you looked at the bankruptcy filing that he had. I mean, honestly, it just looks like the guy got into gambling debt, and he was really in debt. He had $300,000 of student loans alone, and you can't bankrupt out of student loans. But then on top of that, he had all this other debt that had all piled on. And even though he made a lot of money, especially in Moses Lake, it just wasn't enough. And so clearly the guy was in financial distress, and so he was, cutting every corner. And some of those corners he was cutting was taking money from the school board. Part of what made the story a little bit more ridiculous, of course, was the fact that his friend on the school board, then when they were going to let him go, they actually gave him 1 year notice and a bonus on the way out the door. Hey, you stole money from us. We're firing you, but here's a bonus for stealing the money. And I think this bigger story was really about the school board at that time. If you have other superintendents who've done something like that, I definitely want to know who they are. So, Bobby, I see you made that comment there. Make sure you let us know, because any kind of time you see an active theft of funds by a fairly senior position in a school district like that, that's worth noting. Jason, you got a question. Hope you had a great Labor Day. How are judges selected for cases in Washington? It seems they all come out of Ferguson's office. Actually, this is a good question. Or there's a little bit more. It's a little bit more complex than that. So, in Washington State, judges are elected. That is something that makes Washington State a little different than other states. The idea with the founding fathers for Washington State was that they wanted judges to be more accountable to the people, so that they would come up for election sometimes. So if they were out of control or some other problem they had, that the people could hold them accountable and vote them out of office. That was the theory. The practical result, or at least where it's kind of gone now, is that in truth, judges are rarely challenged in office. They oftentimes, we also have an age restriction on judges, so they can only serve to a certain age, and then if they literally have to leave office when they're that old, at least at the Superior Court level and above. And so when they get that age, they have to retire. And so what happens is when judges oftentimes kind of organize their departure from the judge position, they will purposely either resign before their term is up, or they'll make sure that they get elected even though they're about ready to resign because they're going to age out. And the reason why they do that is they want a judge position to be appointed. And if it's a Superior Court position or higher, then the governor gets to appoint the judge. And that allows the governor's office to have pretty much total control over who the judges are. Every now and then you'll have somebody run for office and get elected, but that's a rare path actually for most of these judges the first time around. They usually start out as an appointed position and then they go from there. The reason why Jason's mentioning this about that they all come out of Ferguson's office is we're really talking about cases in Thurston County. And Thurston County is the Superior Court where most cases that go against the state of Washington or that have constitutional questions, they tend to mostly be decided in Thurston County. So the judges in Thurston County are going to be drawn from a pool mostly of people who live in Thurston County. And I say mostly because there's actually a little caveat that is in the state constitution where judges don't actually have to live in the county in which they serve as judge. So it's one of the only positions that you're allowed to actually live outside of district and serve in that position. And so a lot of people don't know that. It comes up very rarely, but it has come up. In fact, it's come up in Thurston County before. And so we have a current judge there who actually lived in Pierce County. I don't know if she still does. She might have moved to Thurston now, but when she ran, she was living in Pierce. So the significance of this is that you have a pool of people who, and you have to have a law degree, you have to have passed the bar license in order to be a judge. And so that really limits the pool of potential candidates. And the Attorney General's office, most of those attorneys are actually located in Thurston County, and there's about 600 attorneys in the AG's office. I'm not sure how many of them are in Thurston County compared to other places around the state, but that's the vast majority of them. They all live there. And so it's it's the biggest law firm in the state, right? They're all concentrated in one place. And so if you're going to try to appoint somebody to be on the Thurston County Superior Court, most likely the pool of attorneys that you're going to draw from are going to come out of the AG's office. That's very typical. And of course, the AG's office has the stint of Rob McKenna for a while. Mostly it's been controlled by Democrats, certainly since Ferguson's been in there. And remember, Gregoire was there before Rob McKenna. Most of the attorneys there are going to be affiliated with the Democrat Party, and so they're going to be affiliated with probably the more lefty-leaning elements of the Democrat Party's agenda, which is going to, in fact, and it only gets worse. And so that's the pool you're drawing from. And so almost every judge, I think, right now that's on the Thurston County Superior Court is affiliated with the AG's office. I think there might be two exceptions to that. One of the exceptions, Judge Dixon has retired last year. But anyway, so generally, that's one of the issues. So the reason why that it looks like it's AG's office controlling these judges, it's really mostly the Thurston Superior Court judges. Sometimes you'll see them in Pierce and in Lewis County maybe, or some of the other Kitsap, but mostly it's going to be Thurston. And that's bad because, of course, the bias and the institutional bias that comes with a judge coming out of the AG's office is horrible. And if you like freedom and liberty, they generally don't. So they're opposed and marginal, especially the recent crews that they're getting out of their AG's office. And these guys are terrible. They're terrible judges. They're bad attorneys. They're egregiously ignorant of the state constitution, and they seem proud of that fact, and they do terrible job. They just do a terrible job. Bad rulings. The Thurston County, one of the judges, Judge Zip, I think recently just made the news by releasing this terrible violent felon with no bail. Like, he was caught. It was a horrible chase. I was already wanted on other warrants. They catch him. The Thurston Sheriff's Office catches him, and he goes to jail. And then immediately the judge just releases him right into the community, so that I guess he can go out and try to kill somebody now. So these judges care not one little micro bit about the damage that they're doing in the community, and they don't care about the victims from the violent criminals that they seem to release in the community all the time. In fact, that just seems to be no priority at all for them, with a couple of exceptions. But I would say mostly that's a true statement, and that's sad. What's going on with the Seattle City Council? Do you have any good stories for us? And is Sawant going to run for higher office? This is from Jason again. Okay, so this is the issue. Seattle right now is in the middle of an election, like most of the cities in the state, and Seattle actually has all the seats being challenged. So there's a lot of contention for the Seattle City Council seats, and in Seattle the elections are going to be raucous, and it's the biggest city in the state, so there's going to be a lot of elections there. So whenever that happens, there's a lot of drama. I don't know where Sawant's going, for sure. I had heard rumors before, but I just don't know where she's actually at right now, and I think those things change. She's kind of involved in the Socialist Collective group out of Seattle, and she's really milks that whole organization to fund her lifestyle, and so I'm not totally sure what her plans are as she gets out of the Seattle City Council. Probably she's run for the state legislature before. My guess is that that's where she would run for that, or she would try to shoot for Congress. Obviously, she's a terrible person to have in any office, whether it's a city council or any other seat. But it's just going to be one of those things where it's not good for anybody. That being said, there are varying levels of sanity with some of the people who are running for the Seattle City Council. I didn't really come to this Ask Me Anything event prepared to necessarily go through and break down the differences between all of them, but I would definitely encourage you to listen to probably Jason Rantz or Ari Hoffman or Brandy Cruz. Any of those people would actually do a pretty good job covering that. The differences between them. I can piggyback on that a little bit from what I know. I have filed some PDC complaints about a lot of different candidates, including several city council candidates. But I think the ones that have posted publicly right now are about ones that aren't on the ballot right now. They were historic candidates. So, but I think Sawant was on my list for some other violations. So there's a number of things going on there. Bobby, you have a question here about Executive Ethics Administration was staffed by the person I was complaining about, the governor. If that isn't one of the most corrupt things ever. Okay, so I think what you're referring to, so Washington State has ethics laws. Essentially, there was an effort to codify the ethics laws decades ago, and they have to break them down. There's constitutional reasons why they do this. They have a legislative ethics board, for example, that supervises ethics complaints or problems with ethics violations in the Washington State Senate and the Washington State Legislature. Then, and that's, so their job is to issue fines, do discovery, whatever's involved in, do investigations in ethics complaints against legislators, so state senators, state legislators. They've always been worried about it turning into a partisan witch hunt there, which it is. I mean, generally they stick Republicans with bigger fines than they do Democrats. The threshold of a violation for Republicanism down here and a Democrats up here. That's always been a concern for that office. I mean, Melanie Stambaugh, when I went and videotaped and did this whole story about an ethics violation complaint that was filed against her, she ended up having like a $5,000 fine for postings on Facebook of public videos that the state had produced and published and shared it widely, and those videos were on her Facebook page, and that was her fine, $5,000. I mean, I've caught Mona Doss when she was a state senator. I got her fined $500 recently. Monica Dingro's fine $250. Those were both based on complaints that I'd filed with the state ethics board, legislative ethics board, I should say, and they were far worse than anything Melanie Stambaugh ever did, but of course their fines were lower. Other times they've also given people a pass. I think the recent one that I had was a bad one. So anyway, what's happened is there are about 50 cities that adopted the state's ethics rules and applied them locally. So I believe Spokane is an example. Mercer Island and Tukwila, I know because those are all cities I've been involved with, or I've filed complaints against elected officials under their own local ethics laws. Sometimes they change them a little bit and water them down. Sometimes they're fairly strict on them. I've had some success in places like Mercer Island, where it was like the former mayor, I can't remember the details now, but clearly misused public resources for her campaign, and she did get in trouble with the ethics board locally for that. And the PDC gave her a pass that time, so that was an interesting dynamic, a little difference, a little bit of double jeopardy in the sense that both of those entities are covering it. But then you have the Executive Ethics Board, which is what I think Bobby's talking about in that question there. And the Executive Ethics Board covers the entire executive department, so it would cover the the governor all the way down to any employees that work in its office. So if there's a director of ecology is out, committing. I realize that most things that a department, the director of ecology does is probably unethical and dishonest, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it violates the state ethics laws. But let's say she decides to go out and do something that's officially a violation of the ethics laws, vote Republican or something, then you would go through the state ethics board and you would go after her for that. And the state ethics board is never going to find Governor Inslee guilty of anything. It's all appointed by Governor Inslee, and so literally he controls that board completely, and no matter what he does, he'll never be found guilty. That's just how it works. Some of the employees underneath him could be found guilty. They might use it for lower level enforcement. Misuse of public resources would be the most common violation, but generally it's not. The Legislative Ethics Board will occasionally fine people of both parties, and there may be a difference in how they're treated. The scales are probably weighted a little bit, but the Executive Ethics Board's not even close. There's no pretense that they even has any attempt to hold anybody accountable in the Inslee administration. I still file complaints there sometimes because it's kind of interesting to see them jump through the hoops to explain away the violations. But that's generally how it goes. And so I still think it's worth filing the complaints there, make them jump through the hoops. I just think that's kind of funny. There's a question here from both Tuesday and Jason that are similar in that they're dealing with, Tuesday's question just has to do with Joe Kent still hoping to gain office at some level, and the answer to that is that yes, he's running for the 3rd Congressional District. He's already announced he's filing his FEC documents. And then related to that with Jason's question, that is the 3rd Congressional District winnable? And actually, it's not moving left at all. The 3rd Congressional District has become more conservative now, certainly than it was 10, 12 years ago. And in fact, I'd say it's probably more conservative. It's getting more conservative than it has been. Joe Kent lost in the general, but that was more of an intra-Republican fight, I think, than anything else. A lot of the supporter, because remember Joe Kent, when he ran essentially in the primary, took out Jamie Herrera Butler, who was the incumbent Republican in that congressional district. And so that's going to create a lot of bitterness, especially among friends of Jamie Herrera Butler, even though her campaign was really, if you're an incumbent congressman and you lose in a 5-way runoff in a primary, you're really doing poorly. And so that's clear. It was a clear indication of her lack of popularity within the district. It just is what it is. But there were a lot of people that still liked Jamie Herrera Butler and had supported her, and so they were bitter that Joe Kent took her out in the primary. There was also other fighting that had gone on there at that time. And so one of the challenges is that a number of those Republicans decided that they wanted a Democrat in office instead. And so they voted for a Democrat. Several of them came out and actually admitted that. So we got this weirdo who's in there now, right? And she's very vulnerable. The district is actually, I think, a +5 Republican, give or take. And it kind of depends on how you look at the surveys, and I don't always trust them, but the voting patterns, certainly at the ledge district level, would indicate that Republican could easily win that district. Right now, Joe Kent's the dominant Republican because he's coming off of a big volunteer group and a lot of endorsements. State parties already endorsed him, so I anticipate that he's, barring an unusual event in the primary, he's probably the guy that comes through the primary to run against the crazy gal in there now. So I wouldn't think that 3rd Congressional District, I think it's very winnable. It's one of the congressional seats that's most likely to be picked up by Republicans next year. Again, unless a bunch of Republicans decide to, this is kind of that fight that we have, that the Republicans will have frequently between mainstream Republicans and more conservative grassroots people. And so the big fight often is very self-destructive because each group will say that they don't want the other group primarying their chosen candidates. And then if they do, then the other group's bitter. And so especially mainstreamers are bitter. And so they'll always vote for the Democrat. And I've watched them do this now several times. And it never really rings true for them to say, well, we don't want anybody to run against an incumbent Republican because they did that against Sutherland, for example. They did it against Taylor in the East Side. They do it against conservative Republicans all the time. And so they're always recruiting people. They were heavily involved in taking out Didier in the 4th congressional race, even diverting resources from other Republican campaigns that could have been won, instead were won by Democrats. But because it was a intramural fight, the priority was to get their flavor of Republican, not to bounce a Democrat out. And so that bitterness has kind of gone back and forth. The interesting thing, just for those who don't necessarily know this already, Speaker of the House J.T. Wilcox ran against a Republican originally. That's what he did. He actually bounced a Republican out. One of the worst Republicans I think we've ever elected to the legislature. Campbell, I think was his name, just a slime ball. And so JT bounced him out in the primary, and that was a really tough, hard-fought fight. The unions came out and threw a ton of money attacking JT, and JT ran a really good campaign, actually, and bounced Campbell out at the time. Less dramatic or nasty was the 20th Ledge District Senate race, which I think was 2012. I might be wrong on this one, but it was where Senator Braun got elected, and so he actually bounced out Senator Swecker, who'd been there a long time. And so that's another example of Republican on Republican. And so whenever Republicans who have bounced out Republicans complain about other Republicans running in their primaries, that's always going to be hard, probably, for most people to necessarily take seriously. You think, though, that maybe people would be a little more mature if they lose in the election, that they would all come together and at least vote for somebody on their side. At least in that way, I find the Democrats tend to be a little bit more cohesive when they run tough primaries internally. They'll still generally join together to make sure that a person gets in. And that's not, that's not how that unfortunately, that's not what's happened lately. Eric, you had a question about, do you think Dave Reichert can win governor next year? Well, I mean, Dave Reichert's an interesting person running. Obviously, I haven't done an updated video again on the governor's race, and I probably won't do it for a while just because not a lot happens between now and January, probably. I'm going to wait a few months before I do another one, updating kind of how things are going, unless there's some dramatic change. But you have two Republicans essentially in that race right now. You have Sammy Byrd and you have Dave Reichert. Now, Dave Reichert's the guy that's probably going to get a lot of establishment money, and a lot of, maybe even some D.C. funds, and a lot of money coming into his race because he was in Congress for so many years. And his congressional district was King County. It had part of King County in it, the 8th congressional district. And so he's going to be the one that a lot of establishment money would jump in behind. And if he's able to fund a pretty big campaign, I think that, and he seems to poll fairly well, I'm sure that's the theory, is that he'll be the one who comes through. But oftentimes, the more conservative candidate does tend to come through in a primary race. And so that's where Sammy Byrd probably has some advantage, potentially over Reichert. It really depends on how many other people jump in the race, if anybody decides to, between now and next May. But when filing week closes. But I don't know that that's going to happen. It just seems like those are the two guys that are probably going to be battling it out. And it's a great question. I don't know. It really depends on the mood of the state and quite a few other issues, I think, that are moving. TZ, you're asking me a question about the repeal of RCW 9.81. I don't know that there's any effort to repeal it. I'd have to read it again to make sure I'm remembering what that one is. So I'm not totally sure about what you're looking for there as far as that question goes. Let's see. I think I've answered this one at the Dave Reichert. I think that was a couple questions on that one. What's the polling for Ferguson? Is he losing steam? This is from Jason. And the answer to that appears to be yes. Mostly it's Ferguson's problem is that he's just a very unlikable guy. To know him is not to love him. To know him is to think he's a creep. And so most people that get to know Ferguson don't like him any better than they do before. Now, they may throw money in his campaign and figure he's the horse they're going to ride, to whatever ends on. And I'm sure he's making lots of promises to the political insider class or the grifter class and make sure they get a bunch of cash if he gets in to be governor. I think there's probably nothing that Ferguson wouldn't do to try to win that race. So I would anticipate every legal and the illegal thing that he thinks he'd get away with activity from him. But he's not likable, and so because of that, more people that get to know him realize he's a slimeball, and so I think that just kind of snowballs into the very low polling that he's getting right now. It's an opening. I don't know how much of an opening that opening is for Republicans. If Ferguson's the one that comes through against a Republican, it'll probably help Republicans, but it actually is a bigger opening at this point in time for another Democrat to be able to take a bite out of Ferguson. And Hillary Franz is probably the leading option for that right now. But she's doesn't seem to be raising the money that she has access to. I'm pretty aware of her fundraising background, and she has the ability to raise a lot of money. She spends it poorly, but so do most Democrats. So. And a decent number of Republicans. But, I mean, she's super inefficient with how she spends her money. But even so, she does have access to it. So I'm a little surprised she hasn't done a better job raising her money. That being said, she is willing to fight. And so my guess is that there's a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes on the Democrat side. I'm hearing about that. So I don't know what the negotiations really are right now. But it's, this whole musical chairs kind of thing that's going on right now with the superintendent the public lands commissioner, which is where Hillary Franz is from, the AG's office, which is where Ferguson's from. They can't run for two offices at the same time, so those are essentially opened, and the insurance commissioner office is also open because Kreidler, who's been fossilized in that position for a long time, is stepping down, and so. And I think his dementia's just gotten too bad to hide it anymore. And so you have these changes. These are big changes. 4 statewide offices that have no incumbents. You also have the Secretary of State office, which Hobbs is a terrible campaigner. He's known as a bad campaigner, and he's known as being incompetent. So you really, technically, if the Republicans had their act together, you do have 5 potential statewide offices that if they ran a really good slate and really good people in each of those positions, they actually do have a chance of prevailing. But we'll see. Nobody wants Ferguson as their governor, TZ. I don't think he does. Nobody does. He's just terrible. And Eric, you mentioned that Culp doesn't live here anymore. It lives in Alaska. I did not know that. So, and if he endorsed Byrd, that might make sense then. So he's not going to run again. So, Jason, yes, it is Sideshow Bob. So that's how the governor's race, I think, might generally kind of function as it moves forward. So one of the other things I want to mention, just for viewers of the live stream, is that as a lot of you know, I do travel around the state a lot. The last couple weeks of August, I wasn't doing a lot of traveling, partially because I think people have a lot of vacations going on, and I had things I was trying to do too. But I can see my schedule just filling up really quickly through September and October. So I know I'm going to be up in Edmonds. I'm doing a presentation there on Thursday evening. I'm going to be on the Brandy Cruz show tomorrow around, I think it's around 1:30. At least that's when I'm going to the studio. I actually don't know if she does that live or if it's pre-recorded. I'm doing a podcast with a pastor at the Remnant Church in Tumwater on Friday. And the following week, I'm sorry, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but anyway, I'm bouncing through a number of these different events. Some of these are I know I'm going to be over in Chelan County. I'm definitely going to be in Spokane at least once. I'm going to be down the Tri-Cities for sure. I'm planning to be up in Whatcom County, and I definitely will be in San Juan County doing some training as well as some presentations. On Cowlitz County, I believe on the 23rd, I'm going to be the MC at their Lincoln Day dinner. And so generally, as usual, I'm going to be driving around the state a lot, and so there's a lot of stuff that's going on. And so I'm happy to see anybody. If you're one of the regular listeners or commenters on my live stream channel, please make sure you come up and say hi if you see me in public. Or if you just happen to run into me anywhere. A lot of people do see me on YouTube videos, and people I've never met before will come up and talk to me in stores or in other places. And I feel pretty honored and humbled, actually, when people are wanting to say hi and even recognize me in public. So I think I'm fairly approachable. Come on up and say hi and introduce yourself. So anyway, that'll be, it's always good to just meet people and kind of put faces behind the comments and questions that come up. This is funny. There's a question here about, do you hunt or fish, from Jack? And the answer is, actually, I grew up hunting more than fishing. I mean, fishing, sure, but hunting mainly. In fact, one of my when I had a paper out, one of the first things that I saved money for was my first shotgun, so that I could go duck hunting when I was 12. And then a 22 was the next one that I bought. I guess technically my mom bought it, but I was saving the money for it. And so I was hunting since I was 12, actually, deer, elk, and waterfowl, and a lot. I actually went to New Zealand hunting a couple times with my uncles down there with some friends that we had in the South Island. So I've hunted red deer and chamois and some of the other animals like that. Part of it too is growing up rurally, and we had a lot of animals that we raised, and predators were always coming in to try to kill them, of course. So you're constantly trying to manage the predator population, and that involves shooting a lot of nasty animals that are coming in to kill your birds or your different animals. So anyway, I like this here. Somebody saying, I don't think Seattle has ever had a good governor, maybe the 80s. Well, I mean, I think you're probably referring to Washington State, Paul, although Seattle has unfortunately elected the last sequence of governors. And we have not had very many good governors. So there's varying stages of bad governors. I think one of the problems is that right now we're dealing with probably one of the worst governors, and just kind of a bumbling goofball as a governor. And the problem with that is not it's not just that the guy that Inslee is not a good governor. It's that the people who he appoints tend to be terrible people, and so the bureaucracy underneath you just keeps getting worse because you're appointing bad people. The Peter Principle is definitely in place, right? So it keeps moving up. That's how it goes. So it's just worth mentioning that I don't know that we've ever had a really good governor. I like some of the governors that we've had in the distant past. When I went through some of the archives, just reading different statements, I mean, there were speeches that there was a governor in the 1920s. I think I did an article about this a couple years ago, who was so much better. I mean, his speech was awesome. And anyway, it's just the way it is. Let's see, Miss Minder Sue. I don't know that you've asked me any question. You haven't asked any question. Why do you keep ignoring my comment? Not ignoring your comment. I just look up here. There's all kinds of comments coming up. I'm usually trying to answer questions if possible. But I will make a comment on a comment, which is Jacob's below you. Yes, Bruce Harrell's probably been less problematic than Durkin in terms of mayor, although, I mean, that's just a real relative improvement, not a huge one. And like you said, if there's something bad in Seattle, it tends to spread like a disease and causes far more damage than COVID as it gets out of the city. That's the same thing that happens in California, same thing happens in Colorado or Texas or any place else. You may think Texas is conservative today, but if Austin keeps growing and spreading its poison, then this Texas goes away. Same with Idaho. Boise's bad; it tends to spread. I was just reading this thing about a homeless camp problem in Wyoming, where the mayor there was shocked at how these homeless. I mean, it sounds like old hat to somebody who lives in Washington State or California or Oregon or someplace, but the homeless trashed this whole place in Wyoming, and they didn't realize. So. Anyway, that's just one of those issues. You had a question. There's somebody here asking about, let's see. I really don't like how the cities get to vote the voice for the rest of us who aren't so woke. I really do not like Inslee at all. I hope Jim Walsh runs. He's a good guy. Well, Jim Walsh is not going to be running for governor, not this cycle anyway, because he just was elected by the leadership anyway to be chair of the state Republican Party. And I don't see him making that kind of a jump. So he's not. If he is going to run for a statewide office, it's not going to be soon. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of drama, and he's going to be running that position right now. North Song, great question. I'm sorry I can't answer it. Where in Edmonds? Let's see. I do not have the address here in front of me, and I should have done that so that I had that right in front of me. But I know I'm going to be up there doing a presentation, and Edmonds is fairly frequent for me to get through that area. So If you want me to come out and do an event, all you have to do is reach out to me, and my email's Glen at We the Governed. If you can organize people that want to hear either a presentation that I would do, or if you want to do some training. I do a lot of activist training around the state, and the reason why I'm doing that is I'm calling it like effective activism mainly. I try to help people organize their local groups, small teams of capable people, to be more engaged and involved in a local government, and to take practical steps that actually can make an impact, I think, at the city, county, school board level. That trickles up to the state, and I don't mind doing bigger training for statewide sort of related issues, but I think that we really lack a fundamental basic approach to how we organize in a way that's actually effective. And the left obsesses about this. If you've ever paid any attention to the structure of their organizations, they obsess about organizing. It's their constant mantra, and they've been doing it for decades. What's amazing is all the money and energy and time they put into it just simply shows the bankruptcy of their ideas generally. But their logic behind the practical application of organizing is actually quite real and true, and it's important. So I think that I try to do a little bit of that. It's a little different because we don't need to micromanage people. What we do want is to give you some basic skills to get you trained up, to have a certain mindset and adaptability that makes sense in your community, and to do certain things that are going to have an impact in your community. And I just try to do training for people like that as much as I can. Jason, you got a question about, are you seeing any of the COVID mandates here? I haven't actually seen anybody seriously talk about it here. And if they're going to happen, they're going to happen in some kind of clown world place like Jefferson County or San Juan County or Seattle or maybe Olympia, right, or Bellingham. You're going to have to get a collection where there's just almost total loons that are in charge there. And they might try to do it, but I don't really see that going too far, actually. Let's see, there's a question here from Ted. State gasoline tax is up another 46 cents a gallon with the carbon offset, right? So is it $100.20 a gallon now? This affects every purchase and falls hardest on the poor. It absolutely does. I'm not 100% sure that your math's exactly right. I'd have to double check that, but you're probably not too far off on how much money you waste with your fuel purchases on gas tax. And remember, most of your gas tax isn't actually going anymore to fix anything related to roads. They pay for most of the road work with debt financing, and so what happens is your gas tax gets spent before you ever give it to the state, because they'll do a road project and put the debt out for years, decades, and so now you're just paying for the work that was done 20 years ago, and that's kind of how it usually works now. So anyway, Jack, you had a question: why do the majority keep voting for everyone's slow demise? Well, keep in mind that the majority of people that vote probably don't know very much about what they're voting for. And so voting and elections in general are marketing. And yes, please, I know, God help me, I'm very familiar with all the problems with the election process, more than almost anybody in the state, because I have to deal with, I've got the voter research project, the teams of people that I'm working with at Doorbell. We're very familiar with a lot of the problems that are out there. But beyond that, there's still a sizable number of people that vote for crazy loons to get to these positions and do crazy things. One of the things is that the media covers up the bad choices and bad decisions these elected officials make, and so it's rarely reported the corruption, the incompetence, the waste, the destruction that they actually wage on people. So I think the average person just isn't aware of that. There's always a lag time, too. When people get into office and they start to make dumb, bad decisions, it tends to take a little while before it impacts somebody's life. So frequently, I've heard people complain about the Growth Management Act, right, 20, 30 years after it was passed, but they had just lived their life hunky-dory and didn't realize there was a problem until they suddenly run into that wall. That's very common. So there's just a real issue related to that lag time, and it's a distributed cost, concentrated benefits problem. The distributed costs are that you and I pay higher taxes, gas tax, sales tax, property tax, B&O tax if you have a business. all those things get, it's annoying, it's obnoxious, it takes a chunk of money. And you don't like it, and you want to fight against it. And most of those taxes are like split into all these different little pies that they're going into. And so is the grifter crews and the different agencies or different people are getting the money. And so for the people who are getting the money, it's the single most important thing to them in the world. That's why Tim Eyman generated such angst with some of his tax cuts, even though they were relatively small in the big scheme of things sometimes. When he would make those cuts, right, you just affected the grifter plans of a couple hundred really connected people who are planning to get super wealthy off the money they're going to take from the taxpayers. And so they're going to be super angry. They're going to do anything they can, right, to fight back. So that's a big issue. So that's one of the issues that you end up having to deal with. And so most people just don't know. And if they do step up and they say, I don't like this tax, and they get involved, they get a little bit of blowback, and they realize, what the heck, the blowback on me, I'm trying to carry the burden for everybody else that's paying the tax. I don't want to deal with this, too much drama, and they give up. Most people just give up before they really make a chance to get anything done. And so that's one of the problems. Let's see. Yes, TZ Inslee is running from the carbon tax, and they knew it was a dumb idea. That's why they didn't. That's why they made it so that the gas stations can't tell you how much the carbon tax actually increases the cost. Jason, you had a question about the Illinois gun ban litigation. I have to imagine that the Supreme Court will probably take that one up. That's one that seems like it's going to affect everybody. But again, I think the people who are hostile to freedom and liberty are attacking gun rights generally across the country, and they're trying to throw enough lawsuits out there that maybe that's their path to take away our freedom. I'm sure that's one of their ideas. Let's see. Miss Minder Sue, what question are you asking? You say I've missed your question, and I've not seen any question other than, why aren't you answering my question? So show me your question, and I'm happy to answer it. Let's see, or at least do my best, no guarantee. Cristiano, you had a question here that's interesting. I don't know much about this. T-Mobile's laying off thousands of Washington employees, and they lied during the merger with Sprint. Is there something that the local government could do in this issue? Good question. It kind of depends on, this happens all the time, these mergers, right, where big corporations will lay a bunch of people off after the merger. The question is who gets laid off, right? And so it sucks when that happens. I don't think, if the merger's been approved, and I think it was, I don't know that they're going to have much of an opportunity to do anything. I mean, I'm sure Ferguson would try to make some hay out of that, because you could have an AG lawsuit against him, of course. But I don't know that anybody else is going to have much luck with that, especially if a company's kind of having problems, then it's just going to be reduced. Let's see. There's a question here. Will you please consider doing a video on how DOT, this is from Ted. So will you please consider doing a video on how DOT, which I'm assuming is Department of Transportation, paying property taxes, launders transportation dollars back into the general fund, like with Sound Transit 3. It's a big problem. Yeah, and that's a good observation. What Ted's actually referring to there is transportation projects spend a ton of money on supplies, right? Just all kinds of supplies they're using to put into the road. And there had been an argument at one time that they shouldn't be paying so much extra money for sales tax, because after all, it's tax money in the first place. So they were trying to get it so that transportation projects could build these roads without paying sales tax. Because essentially, you spend a huge amount of money, like $100 million, right? And so that's another $10 million. Every $100 million, you're throwing another $10 million back into property taxes. Sales tax. And so the sales tax is actually what it is. The property tax that you're mentioning here, I'll have to look into that. I'm not sure how much property taxes DOT pays right now. So there would have to be some specific category of property that they would be able to do that with. But I am familiar with the sales tax side of it. So I'll have to look into that. Ted, that's a good question. That's very wonkish. I kind of like those. Let's see. Jason got a question about what's your opinion on Vancouver and its leadership? Will it go the way of Portland? I don't know. Vancouver has wavered at times, right? And to some extent, Portland has been the insanity on the other side of the river, and Vancouver's been pretty steady Eddie, a little bit more subdued in their craziness. And in fact, you have a lot more Republicans, for what it's worth, and that's always a measurement of something, that are elected in several of the legislative districts, 17th and 18th, which are kind of the two districts that go around downtown Vancouver, which is the 49th. Mostly that's a matter of local people in Clark County, whether they're going to do a good job organizing and staying focused. I would spend a lot of time reaching out in Vancouver and promoting freedom and liberty and exposing some of the corruption and the problems in Vancouver and around that area. You're more likely to be able to hold back. You're able to hold back some of the craziness that I'm sure Portland would like to shove across the river into our world. Jason, you got a question. If Washington gets rid of the gun preemption, do you think Vancouver will pass any gun bans? And what's the makeup of the city council? Maybe, but Vancouver wouldn't be alone. I'm sure you'd have a couple of crazy. You'd have Spokane, you'd have Bellingham, you'd have Olympia, you'd have Seattle. You'd probably have Edmonds, Shoreline for sure. Maybe not Edmonds, but Shoreline for sure. Maybe Everett. Probably not Marysville, but you'd have places like San Juan's and Port Townsend. They would probably try to take advantage of that. It's a lot of virtue signaling, but it would be classic. Let's see, Ted, thank you for filling in for Minder Sue. When will we get our rightful governor cult back? Because we all know he won. Well, it's not going to happen. It's not. I'm sorry. Nobody's going to put Colt back, and that isn't how it works. Unfortunately, it just isn't. And I don't know if I should say it. It's if you don't win the election, or they say you don't win the election, and that's just how it kind of comes out. You're not going to be pulled out of the back, even if they find and prove the fraud or something happened. They might have another election, but they're already getting one next year. So. That's the kind of stuff that that happens there. There's no really getting somebody back. The challenge that you always have with elections is that fraud is basically accepted at a certain level in elections, and you have a very limited window of time in which you can make a difference on the election process, and it's very difficult now, I think, to do that. That's like a whole nother. I would have to do like a whole hour on just the election process. Jacob, you had a question. Do you think it's valuable to get involved in liberal city council races? I do, actually. Choosing the better candidate, even if they're liberal, and the answer is yes, because if you there's differences between complete insane people and just basic garden variety corruption. So if you get total crazy people, and I realize that there's been an argument in the past that some conservatives have used that, hey, listen, let them put the craziest people in there, and it'll get so bad that it'll drive them back to us. That's not how it works. It doesn't tend to work that way. What they do is they drive people out, but they solidify their base of craziness there and their corruption, and that's really problems. That it just produces a really bad problem. So I think you always engage, you try to push back, even if there's just two flavors of liberal. I've certainly been involved in races like that before in the city of Olympia and in Lacey and Tumwater and other places, around the state. And you want somebody that's sane. You just don't want total crazy. And we're really descending into this political world where you're really getting these exceptionally weird, crazy people get into public office because the left has decided that's that's the horse they're going to ride to get the biggest grifting operations. Some of it is ideological, but some of it, I think, people discount the significance of the payback operation that you can get out of it. If you get your people into public office, people who care about freedom and liberty don't tend to look at government this way because we don't like government. We want it out of our lives. We want smaller government, not bigger government. But there's a lot of people that have made their peace with bigger government, and they've decided, well, I'll accept bigger government. I'm just going to want my piece of the pie. So they want to take as much as they can from government in contracts, in grants, in no bid grants. Grant grifting is really big now. It's almost $1 billion of grant grifting alone in the Seattle area. That's huge business. There's a lot of things that people will do to get that money. The transit oriented development, right? Transit development around the light rail stations. One big con operation from the beginning. So anyway, so that's what it is. Jason, you referenced Colorado was a disaster. I think that's true. Why do we pay toll to get out of Gig? Cristiano, you got a great question. Why do we pay a toll to get out of Gig Harbor? Great question. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge was expensive to put in. It definitely was. There were ways they could have done it that would have eliminated that toll. I believe in theory that toll does go away eventually, but I don't know. Once they get a tax, right? It's very hard for them to ever find a way to take that tax away. New York discovered that many years ago, where they technically had tolls on the bridges, and when the bridges were paid for, the tolls would go away. Well, I believe it was Robert Moses, who was the city administrator there decades ago. But he became famous for finding ways to ensure the tolls never ended. So rolling debt forward, find other things to basically lump it all in and keep the tolls going. And Washington, we had 2 tolls like that that were eventually thrown out. One was on the 520 bridge, and one was on the Hood Canal Bridge, because I remember both those as kids. And when they were paid off, actually, they did get rid of the tolls, but the government at the time was trying to keep them going, and people threw a big fit about it, and so they took away the tolls. So, and now, of course, with the recent construction on the 520, they put tolls back on there, and now we have tolls on tolling lanes on 405, which is crazy. That should be illegal. One of the things I actually think would be helpful is if you were governor stepping in, I would get rid of some of these tolls. And the Tacoma Narrows Bridge may be one of those places that you could do that. I have to look into that one a little bit more to see when that ends, but it is coming up. There's a number of questions here that you're pointing in about Colorado, and I'm pretty familiar with that. The blueprint, of course, has been sold as the story you read about how it happens. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. Arsenio, you asked a question about why do they keep freeing criminals here, like the guy who set fire to the encampments. Can we do something to sue the government? Historically, the answer to that has been no. There's a lot of legal protection for judges and prosecutors who seem to enjoy unleashing violent felons into the community. What you really have to do is run a campaign against them and take them out, replace them with somebody else. Seattle actually has Ann Davidson as their city prosecutor, and she's pretty good. The King County prosecutor is not. I don't know. I mean, I really think we aren't publicizing the cases very well and aligning them with here's the prosecutor or here's the judge. Here's a prosecutor who refused to prosecute. Here's the judge that refused to put him in jail or make him pay something to hold them in control. Instead, they just keep releasing them. And I think we need to do a better job exposing that. Let's see, Seattle banning meat in cars. This is a question from Jacob. I don't think that's very likely. Actually, there was somebody else asked that question. TZ, I think you did. Heard about Seattle joined. Yeah, I don't see them really banning cars or meat in Seattle. And remember, there's a lot of dumb ideas that get floated around out there, and I don't think that many of them are going to see fruition. Now, there's a lot of crazy things that are going on right now that were dumb ideas a number of years ago, and I didn't think they'd see fruition either. So fair enough, you can blame me for that, but I don't see that one as being a super likely one. Partially, I think we're just kind of coming to this culmination of a lot of craziness. It's historically what happens is something blows up, something breaks, and hopefully it's not catastrophic in a significant way, and so it'll all get a little bit more under control. And some level of sanity will come back. And so we have to be prepared to engage in government to make a difference like that. But I know that Ted, with the signing on to the UN C40 Cities Initiative, that's right. That sounds like one of the dumb ideas they've had. So people should be aware of it. These are stupid and terrible and self-destructive things out here. But I think there's so many problems on the horizon so quickly that are going to be much more significant than the virtue signaling kind of elitist kind of attitudes like that. That I think a lot of those ideas kind of fade away when they start to try to implement them, just because they get caught up in the drama of other current events. In Russia, there had been a big debate back in the 1915, 1920 era, early teens, so the early 1900s, before the Bolshevik Revolution. And you had the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. And one of their big debates at the time was they were trying to come up with this perfect utopian city scheme. And it really matches almost identical, at least the Mensheviks were pushing the city scheme that looks almost identical to the UN scheme that they have now. And the reason is it was about creating these walkable cities, really. Now, they didn't call them walkable cities back then, but essentially that's what it was. Everybody's close to everything. It's all organized kind of in a certain way. Mass transit could bring you in and take you out. It was very controlled. And that idea flew apart once they had their revolution and other issues kind of bypassed them. And of course, the Bolsheviks ended up killing most of the Mensheviks. So that's what they do when the left really wins, when the communists get in control. And so that's how it happens. So I think you just remember these debates have been ongoing for a long, long time. I did another video recently, got two of them that'll come out this week. One is on the dumbing down of the public education system in Washington. And the second one is really a little different than what I normally do. I'm kind of using this format that we have here right now, but it's going to be talking about three things that are probably worth being concerned about that we could avoid if we choose to do so. And that a lot of these other things are distractions meant to distract us. So anyway, with that, I just want to thank everybody for being in the live stream tonight. I realize I kind of started early. It's because I have other meetings with other activists that I'm trying to have in the evening tonight. And so anyway, we'll see if I can get to that meeting in time here. But thank you for all your comments. Please feel free to share this with others. Leave me other comments down below and I can get back to you on them. But hopefully this is helpful. I am always interested in the feedback that you give me. I really appreciate everybody who wants to log on. And hopefully I'll see some of you guys around the state the next couple months as I travel around. My next live stream, I will actually bring out my calendar here and lay out some of these places where I'll actually be, so it's easier for you to meet up with me in person if you want to. And with that, guys, it's just good to have you here. I hope you appreciated this, and we will see you next time.